All right, we are picking up with our last book in Synthesis 112. That's what we were looking for. The Song of Solomon. This is also one of the most intriguing books of the Scriptures. It'll be some time before I preach from it. Yeah. And I never have yet, but
What do you mean?
there's quite a few. Well, I just find it difficult to, like, it's so strange to North American ears, that I need to do more study in it myself before I would preach it. However, there have been quite a few choruses and songs that we're familiar with taken from this book. Let's look at it. The title of the book. Irving Jensen says that the title, Song of Songs, which is the Hebrew title, coming from the first verse of the book, the Song of Songs, which is Solomon's. This title is the Hebrew way of expressing the superlative. That is, since 1 Kings chapter 4 verse 32 tells us that Solomon wrote 1,005 songs, from the way this one is worded, this was his best one. 1,005 songs and 3,000 proverbs. The book is also known as the Song of Solomon, based on 1:1, which we just read, after giving us the title, it says, which is Solomon's. So the Song of Songs, which is Solomon's. Or the Song of Solomon. That's the title that the English has. It is also known as Canticles. Unger explains where these titles come from. The English title of the book, Song of Solomon, he says, is not a translation. The title Song of Songs is a slavish literal rendering of the Hebrew idiom. And he points out that it fails to communicate the proper idea. The title of this book in the Septuagint was Asma Asmatone. Asma, like asthma without a th. Just Greek, Asma Asmatone. And the Latin Vulgate title was, or is, Canticum Canticorum. Canticum Canticorum. And that is where the English title Canticles comes from. It's just Canticles is an obsolete word for song. Obsolete English word. Right, moving on to the authorship of the book. Jensen points out that the traditional view as to who wrote this book is Solomon. Says that is supported strongly by the internal characteristics, the fact that his name appears about 6 times in the book. Chapter 1, verse 1, the Song of Songs, which is Solomon. Verse 5, I am black, but comely, O ye daughters of Jerusalem, like the tents of Kedar, like the curtains of Solomon. Chapter 3, verse 7, 9, and 11. Behold his bed, which is Solomon's. 80 valiant men are about it, of the valiant of Israel. King Solomon made himself a chariot of the wood of Lebanon. Go forth, O ye daughters of Zion, and behold King Solomon with the crown, with his mother crowned him in the day of his espousal, and in the day of the gladness of his heart. Also, chapter 8, verses 11 and 12. Solomon had a vineyard at Baal Haman. He leased the vineyard unto keepers. Everyone for the fruit of it was to bring 1,000 pieces of silver. Unger outlines at least four points in support of Solomonic authorship of this book. First, the local color, the affluence, the royal luxuries, descriptive of the royal throne, certainly suit what we know about Solomon's reign. Right? So there's many allusions to wealth and riches in this book. Secondly, the place names that are mentioned, Jerusalem, En-Gedi, Mount Gilead, chapter 4, verse 1, Mount Hermon, chapter 4, verse 8. There's quite a few geographical references. They certainly fit the picture that would be necessary to describe the United Kingdom. It doesn't appear to be any place that you can't go. It seems to be freedom of movement. Thirdly, the book, in its poetic references, seemed to parallel how Solomon spoke of trees and animals and birds. In this book, according to Steinmuller, Unger quotes this fellow as his source, Solomon refers to 21 varieties of plants and 15 species of animals, just in this book. And lastly, Unger points out that there are one or two Persian and Greek words in this book, in Hebrew. One or two Persian or Greek words borrowed from those languages. And he says that this is probably evidence of the close ties that the Jews had with these peoples at this particular time in Solomon's great kingdom. He had peace all around. He had all kinds of trade with surrounding nations. The fact that there would be increased contact with these peoples would have a resulting effect in the language spoken. There's no reason to question the traditional view that Solomon wrote the book. And if Solomon wrote the book, then of course that places the date of it in the 10th century BC. And in Jensen's view, Solomon probably wrote this book when he was still young, before he had fallen away. So he would place it towards the beginning of his reign, approximately 965 BC. Keys to the book of Song of Solomon. Both McGee and Jensen have chosen the term beloved. is one of the key words. See if you can find a couple of references in the first chapter. Okay, chapter 1, verse 14. My beloved is unto me as a cluster of henna flowers. Chapter 2, verse 8. The voice of my beloved, behold, he cometh, leaping upon the mountains, skipping upon the hills. My beloved is like a roe. Verse 10, my beloved spoke. 2:16, my beloved is mine and I am his. Right? So that is the woman's term, or intimate term for her husband. And love, my love, is the husband's term for his wife. Also a key word in the book. Chapter 1, verse 9. I have compared thee, O my love, to a company of horses in Pharaoh's chariots. Chapter 2, verse 2, as the lily among thorns, so is my love among the daughters. Chapter 3, verse 5, I charge you, O ye daughters of Jerusalem, by the roes and by the hinds of the field, that you stir not up, nor await my love till it please. Right? A few examples of that. The endearing titles in the book for the individuals. It's not the only ones. I just happened to see one there. He calls, she calls him my dove. Chapter 2, verse 14. That may just be one reference. Fair and comely are other words Jensen points out that are used with great frequency in the book. It's a book of joy and happiness. Chapter 1, verse 4. We will be glad and rejoice in thee. I guess this is a blissful marriage rather than a blisterly. All right. So I just want to read 2 or 3 verses here that have a key phrase in it. Chapter 3, verse 5, I charge you, O ye daughters of Jerusalem, by the roes and by the hinds of the field, that ye stir not up, nor await my love till it please. Take that with 5:8. I charge you, O ye daughters of Jerusalem, if you find my beloved, that you tell him that I am sick with love. And chapter 8, verse 4. I charge you, O daughters of Jerusalem, that ye stir not up, nor await my love till it please. So the phrase, I charge you, O daughters of Jerusalem, it's used several times. Key verses of the book. Jensen picks 3 of them. Chapter 2, verse 16. My beloved is mine, and I am his. He feeds upon the lilies, among the lilies. There's a Christian chorus built on that verse, right? No. My beloved is mine, and I am his. I'm sure I've heard that incorporated in the song. Can't remember the name of it now. Right? Chapter 6, verse 3 is another of his choices. I am my beloved's and my beloved is mine. He feeds among the lilies, twice. And chapter 8, 6, in the first part, it says, I don't know. First part of the verse says, set me as a seal upon thine heart, as a seal upon thine arm, for love is strong as death. So the reference to the sealed relationship there, true commitment. This was the man speaking. So it refers to the security as well. Security. All right, those are key verses according to Jensen. J. Vernon McGee picked 6:3, which we've already read, and 8:7. He said, many waters cannot quench love, neither can the floods drown it. If a man would give all the substance of his house for love, he would utterly be rejected. That's pretty self-explanatory. Definition of true love. Sounds like
utterly be rejected.
Well, in other words, you can't buy love or whatever. Like if you tried to buy your way into somebody's heart, give everything you own. So I think that sounds like Johnny Cash's Ring of Fire. You ever heard that song? Also the same imagery. Country and Western theme, love. All right, so the theme and the message and the title of the book of Song of Solomon. Some of these are more specific than others. Some of them are taken as principles, but for example, Jensen says that the theme of this book is union and communion. Union and communion. That is, as illustrated in a marriage relationship, two people are united and they have fellowship one with the other. Right? Of course, the book more than likely does represent the spiritual relationship of God to his people as well. So God is united with his people and has fellowship, intimate fellowship with his people. Schofield says the theme of this book is the beloved, focusing on the man. But the book, in his view, stresses the husband, what the husband is like. It's really an ode of praise to. Seems kind of funny that Solomon wrote an ode of praise to himself, but nevertheless, what is the impression that is left of the man? It's a very exalted impression here. However, I think probably be more fair or whatever to look at both sides, as Jensen does. And then Unger says that the theme or message of this book is the sanctity of wedded love. The sanctity of wedded love.
When you're going to preach a thing, that'd be a good place. And do it married.
Oh, I see.
The wedding.
Yeah. Never thought about it. Never had to marry anybody, so never had to. Yeah, you're gonna bum out if you ever have to do a wedding, Wes. It's like while we're on this unrelated theme. You know what really gets me is whenever I see on television, you see it quite frequently, Roman Catholic priests and nuns doing marriage seminars and stuff like that. Like, to me, that is, I don't know what the word is for it. Just.
Well, it's like, it'll be something like me giving marriage counsel.
Yeah, sure. Not that it can't be done, because I know Bill Gossett does. stuff like that,
Well,
you know. But
if you hold the scriptures,
yeah.
But I mean, if you try to get something from experience,
Yeah, no, yeah, and yet a lot of that stuff is, pure psychology, just human experience, and that really gets me when I hear about people. It's like we took, my wife and I took pregnancy classes, childbirth classes from a nun. It was just, I couldn't believe it. I didn't even want to go back, So, yeah, I think that it does make sense that you'd want to be somebody that knew a little bit about this kind of stuff and experience. Certainly, what a mystical book this must be to a non-believer or to a person that just preaches as a profession or something. Some parts of the Bible are just really difficult to try saying about. The relationship of the Book of Solomon, Song of Solomon to the rest of Scripture. Just comparing this book to Ecclesiastes for a moment. Irving Jensen says that the book of Ecclesiastes focuses on the intellect of man, his mental outlook on Christ. Whereas the book of Songs, Song of Solomon, focuses on the emotions of man, the emotion of love. Ecclesiastes shows us that you can't be satisfied without Christ, even if you possess the whole world. This book shows that you cannot fathom Christ, even if you set your affections on Him. It's like trying to describe the infinite. You just have to keep talking, And that must be why there are so many of all the books in the Scripture, maybe perhaps outside of the book of Revelation. This book is so filled with figures of speech, because it's trying to describe the infinite, trying to describe God's love, and it can't be done. It's hard enough to describe genuine human love. You just have to use examples and illustrations and parallels, right, and figures. Just do it. Even in English, songwriters do that all the time. Song after song after song was written to try to describe or define whatever. And you just have to keep. It's a pretty difficult thing to define true love, whether it be God's or man's, and especially God. In relationship to the other 5 books, the poetical book, Song of Solomon is the 5th in the English Bible. But it's the first of the 5 rolls of the Megillah in the Hebrew Bible. Portions of the Song of Solomon are sung by the Jews on Passover. This is an interesting parallel. According to Jensen, the Jews likened the Song of Solomon to the most holy place, Ecclesiastes to the holy place, and Proverbs to the outer court of the temple. On what basis, I don't really know, except that it's obvious the Song of Solomon is more intimate. The Jews likened Song of Solomon to the most holy place, or the Holy of Holies. Ecclesiastes was parallel to the holy place. Proverbs was likened to the outer court of the temple. Jensen also makes a point about the parallel between Song of Solomon and the book of Ephesians in the New Testament. He points out that each has the same type of purpose, that is to reflect about Christ and His church. Obviously, he takes the book of Song of Solomon as a representation of the marriage relationship between Christ and the church. Right? So those two books certainly have similar themes. As far as this book's relationship to the rest of the Bible, Jensen points out, rightly so, that it's probably one of the most misunderstood books of the Bible. Imagine what Reader's Digest would do with it or something. Or film Hollywood, if they were trying to build a plot out of something like this, what would they do,
There are two things I saw. One was that in Signal, you mentioned that there's now a dial of Bible porn.
Oh, yeah.
So I probably didn't hear there was something also. I read an article about a year ago, and it was placed down in the States. They were making a pornographic Bible.
All right.
Yeah, I just can't believe it. They would go through and
just pick everything out you could.
And it'd be in Bible form too.
Yeah. Wow. This is one of the unique books of Scripture. No other book in the Bible has love between men and women as the main plot and theme. Ruth comes close. And no other Old Testament book is alluded to in this book. Stands alone. All right, let's look at a few notes of interest in the book. Irving Jensen points out, this is my source for these, everything I want to say here. Regarding the form of this book, Song of Solomon is a unified lyrical poem with a series of stanzas or songs of varied lengths. It's a unified lyrical poem with a series of stanzas or songs of varied lengths. As far as the setting and the main characters of the book, you have Solomon, king of Israel, son of David and Bathsheba, and a Shulamite woman. Chapter 6, verse 13 alludes to the woman in this terms, return, return, O Shulamite, return, return, that we may look upon thee. What will ye see in the Shulamite? And so, because she's called a Shulamite, more than likely she's a woman from Shunem, Jensen says. Shunem. Other main characters include the daughters of Jerusalem. We've already read a couple of verses that refer to them. And the family of the girl is referred to in chapter 8. Her brothers speak or spoke. There are companions mentioned in chapter 8, verse 13. Chapter 3, verses 7 to 10. One of the guards, behold his bed, which is Solomon's. 60 valiant men are about it, are the valiant of Israel. They all hold swords, being expert in war. It alludes to that anyway. It doesn't identify him as such, but other people are involved in the story, but Solomon and the girl and these other ladies in Jerusalem, whoever they are, not specifically mentioned. Maybe it's not inconceivable that they would be the women in his harem or something. But now, as far as the interpretation of this book, you have at least 3 particular views.
What's this called?
The interpretation, key point here. What approach do you take? Well, you have 3 options at least. Maybe I'll come across another one, but Jensen says the first view is a naturalistic view. It's just a human love story with literary merit. And with no typical or figurative meaning intended. And I'm sure that this is the way the book would be summarized if Reader's Digest did a thing on it or whatever. Isaac Asimov, if they were to summarize this book, it would just be a love story, and they'd refer to it that way.
Didn't you do a book on...
It has, yeah. 2 volumes. Big volumes. Amazing. Alright, so the naturalistic view is just a human love story. No spiritual meaning. An allegorical interpretation of the book would take everything as purely figurative and wouldn't even hold that anything in this book actually was historical in fact. Just taking the names. And of course, there are all kinds of examples of such kinds of writings in the pseudegraphica, or pseudegrapha, I don't know how to pronounce that word, the false writings that have existed from the days of the Jews till now. People would write books and they would attribute, call people by, like fiction, basically. Use people's names, and sometimes famous names, but nothing really took place. So that's another plausible view that it wasn't actually historically real. And then the third, and probably, in my view, it's the only right view, is the typical view. that this book is actually giving us types based on actual historical facts. Our God is big enough and smart enough and sovereign. If he is God, he has to be sovereign, so he is very capable of allowing people to have historical experiences that prefigured future events in his plan and his program. I don't doubt that at all. So the typical interpretation of this book means that the book teaches by example, based on historical facts, and viewing these facts as types or figures or representations. Now, the next question then is, well, all right, if it's typical, then what is it typical of, right? Exactly what? How do you apply it? To whom do you apply it? That's the next issue. What are the applications of this book? And there are basically three. You either take the bride in this book as Israel, and God as the bridegroom. And in a moment we'll look up some references in the Old Testament that show that that figure was frequently used. Or it refers to the church as the bride and Christ as the bridegroom. Or perhaps it refers, the woman refers to the individual believer in that person's relationship to his or her love, who should be Christ. Jensen points out that the reason there's confusion on this, or the reason it's difficult to settle on one in place of another application, is because the speakers aren't identified by name in the context, outside of Solomon. So, he points out that there are at least two lessons that you could take from this book. A literal lesson and a figurative lesson. Literally, the book, no doubt, does honor pure married love. This book stands as a beautiful commentary on Hebrews chapter 13, verse 4, I think it is, which says that marriage is honorable and the bed is undefiled. It's Hebrews 13:4. Marriage is honorable and the bed undefiled. Four. The figurative lesson is to show God's love for his people, even to the individual. I suppose, just while it crossed my mind, I think probably the reason I would find it difficult to preach on a thing like this, especially like say in a church service or something, is because to keep kids from being titillated or people from just wandering off in their minds in the wrong directions, you would have to say the kind of things that would prevent you from saying what you really want to say about it. In other words, like if I was going to preach on it or speak on it or teach on it, I'd want to do it, say, in a married couples class or something where you can go ahead and talk about it without any without having to qualify anything all the time. So I could see myself teaching this book, but under certain circumstances. Anyway. So, yeah, 2 lessons. Literally, the book certainly does honor physical love within a marriage context. And for that reason, the book is very important. And secondly, it teaches that God certainly does have love for his people. And I said we were going to look up some of those references. Jeremiah chapter 2, verse 2. Would you want to do that one? Jeremiah 2:2. I'll read Hosea 2:16 and 18 to 20. And Ezekiel 16, verses 8 to 14.
Ezekiel what?
16, verses 8 to 14. Isaiah 54, verses 5 and 6.
And now, if you go and cry in your ears, Jerusalem, saying, thus saith the Lord, I remember thee the kindness of thy youth, the love of thy spouse, and thou wentest after me in the wilderness, in a land that was not sown.
Okay. So the wilderness wandering was like Israel being espoused. Kind of interesting. Because the wanderings, not the wanderings, but the journeys from deliverance to the rest is a picture of the Christian life too. And the church, even the church is espoused to Christ in our spiritual walk. So, see the parallel? No? He refers to the espousals in the wanderings.
Right.
So going from Egypt to the promised land was the path that Christ led them as redeemed people.
Right.
And he refers to that period of time, after they were redeemed, as being espoused to him, although they hadn't yet experienced full rest. It's the same thing in the Christian life. Believers today are espoused to Christ.
Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah. Even though they've not committed.
Sure. So Jeremiah 2:2, and then Hosea 2:16. It shall be at that day, saith the Lord, that thou shalt call me Ishi, and shall no more call me Baali. Baal. What does Baal mean?
Well, I just knew, yeah. Go.
Well, literally, it actually means Lord.
Lord.
And Baali, with that suffix on the end, that personal suffix, it means my Lord. And by the way, that was a common term for my husband. Right? In Proverbs 31, in fact, in the Song of the Virtuous Woman, when it refers to her husband, it refers to her husband as her Baal, her Lord. See? So Baal is translated as Lord and husband, but with the concept of lordship. Ishi is an intimate term of equality. And that's the concept here. The Lord is saying to Israel, someday you're going to call me Ishi. You're going to be on a much higher level. You're going to be raised up to be on a par where you can really fellowship with me instead of just calling me Lord. Kind of an interesting verse. And then verses 18 to 20. In that day will I make a covenant for them with the beasts of the field, with the fowls of the heavens, with the creeping things of the ground, and I will break the bow and the sword and the battle out of the earth, and will make them to lie down safely, and I will betroth thee unto me forever. Yea, I will betroth thee unto me in righteousness and in justice and in loving kindness and in mercies. I will even betroth thee unto me in faithfulness, and thou shalt know the Lord. So in contrast with Israel's whoredoms and fornications, because of their spiritual wandering, someday they're going to be betrothed and be faithful in that future kingdom. Okay, we won't take time to read the other ones, but well, we're done now anyways. We'll finish this next class.